Got it.
Hi, Isabel.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for
Nice to see
joining.
you. Mhm.
You're the first one here, so we're gonna wait a couple minutes for some other folks to join.
Sounds good.
Yes.
I don't know if others are seeing this, but like there's like just like the sliver of the bottom part that's not showing up in the oh, there it goes. There we go.
Yes. Sorry, that was my menu that. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Let's see. He's here. Well, let's give a few minutes to start.
Hi, Jay.
Hey, happy to be here. I'm going to be off camera because I'm kind of multitasking, but I am here and listening and participating.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining. Hector, were you able to get some music going?
I could, though. Let's see how it goes. I'll try. Let's see some music.
We'll wait a couple more minutes here for some other folks to join.
Oh, 1 second. Okay. Share sound. Can you hear this music?
Yeah.
Wonder. Welcome. We're just waiting a few minutes for to let more people join. And then we start.
Let's start at 5:40. Does that sound good, Hector?
Yes, that sounds good. I know I know this is being recorded, but that's also for the record. We are always concerned about the turnout of in these events. So we are trying to do the outreach when we understand that these type of events are demanding and we are asking a lot from people. So there is always this effect of being tired of participating in these events, but hopefully we can do better next time and find best ways to engage.
So we'll get started here in 1 minute. Thanks all for your patience.
Fantastic. All right. So let me pause the music. And I think we can start with welcome everyone. And thank you everyone who's joining today. We are starting with this session, the third topic on the development of the surveillance technologies policy. We divided originally, we thought about like this is a complex issue and complex policy. We are starting with some issues around transparency, well definitions and all that. And then we would jump into the governance and what is the community involvement. And this is the third topic about how the city should acquire, purchase, procure surveillance technologies, particularly. What would be the criteria, the processes, and then also around that. So we need privacy services. And for this particular session, we are going to focus on something called privacy impact assessments, which is a tool that helps organizations in general to understand what are the risks, what are the impacts of using any specific technology, particularly in this case, surveillance technologies. We are designing this event so we can actually start having all these conversations. This is an open discussion, which is being recorded, is being live streamed. Eventually, one of the ideas of being live streamed and recorded is that everything that we are saying here is actually going to be available to everybody later to watch it, to start conversations, to use it as well as a reference. Following this conversation, we are going to have a workshop 2 weeks from now and this workshop is not going to be recorded, and the intention for that workshop is going to generate the policy recommendations, specific policy recommendations, and the questions are going to be slightly different and more targeted towards the policy. We recently we just posted in our website like a small report on all the learnings that we have so far, like a summary of all that. Please, if you have time, if you have been participating, take a look at that. I think if you think something is missing, let us know as well. So with that, I'm going to start this conversation with some like welcoming and some logistics as well. You are probably familiar with Zoom. Just as a quick reminder, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you have a number of controls, the ones that allow you to mute, unmute your microphone, video. Remember, this is being recorded. If you don't want to like being seen, so please disable your video. You can see how many participants are here. You have a chat button where you can also share questions, comments through the chat, and send non-verbal also feedback to us. Well, the agenda is going to be straightforward. First, we're starting with actually, we're going to start with a quick recap of everything that we have been doing. And then we're going to have a short presentation on issues around how procurement of technology works in the city and what is a privacy impact assessment. With few slides and a little bit of sharing how we have been like what we're working on the privacy impact assessments internally in the city. We're going to have a short break then, and then we start these the community discussions and conversations. If you are joining on your personal time, please consider we are actually offering incentives, gift cards, electronic gift cards for $50 for you as a way to incentivize and also give you thank you for your time here. There are a few restrictions, like if you need to leave, work or play or worship here in Portland, your participation is not part of your main job or work, or you are not officially representing an organization, and if all city employees are not eligible. So you can send us your name, email in the chat, or we can also have a form where you can actually fill up the form and send that to us, and we are going to process that after that. So we're going to post that in the chat right now. This is the form that you can fill up. Please consider doing that. So who are we? My name is Hector Dominguez. I should have started with that. I am part of the Smart City PDX team. My role there, I'm the Open Data Coordinator, also coordinate the work on privacy and surveillance. My colleague, Judy Murray, she's not joining us today, but she is a policy advisor at the Office of Equity and Human Rights and has been a key partner on all the work that we are doing around privacy and surveillance technologies. We have two community leads, Anisha Cochran-Dumas and Surya Raj Joshi. And Surya, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself a little bit.
Hi, everyone. My name is Surya Joshi. In my everyday work, I work at ERCO. For this project, I'm one of the community leads where I am bringing my experience from my community works, working with different immigrant and refugee community and low-income community, their voice to this forum on City of Portland's surveillance technology development process.
Thank you. And this work would be really, really hard without the logistics support and many times even moral support from Cascadia partners. And I let Irene and Ajano introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. My name is Irene Kim. I'm with Cascadia Partners. We're the engagement consultant helping the city with the engagement process here. And I'll turn it over to my colleague Ayano to introduce herself. And then also Onisha joined us as well, so she can introduce herself afterwards. Thanks.
Hi, everyone.
Ayano Healy, here to support the discussion section of tonight's meeting. Looking forward to hearing from you. I'll pass it over to Onisha. Onisha, are you there to introduce yourself? All good if you're not able to.
Yeah, she might be
Yeah, she might
not
be.
available. Yeah, Onisha is also part of our the community leads.
I'm here.
Ah, yes.
Hi, my name is Onisha Cochran. I'm a peer recovery mentor and a mutual aid in the community. And I am a community lead cohort member for this year and grateful to be here.
Thank you, Onisha. We are grateful that both of you, you and Surya, are helping us with all this work. And the work is going to start getting more and more interesting. All right. So quick polling, this is part of what we are doing. You're going to see who's joining us today, who's participating today. So if you want, please answer those questions that you are seeing on your screens right now. That helps us also to understand who's joining and then plan better future events and see how we are doing. Awesome. All right. So thank you for filling out this quick poll. A quick recap. So why we are doing this work is basically based on the CDE of Portland core values. We are trying to develop policies, in this case, the surveillance technologies policies based on being anti-racist, on equity, transparency, communications, collaboration, and fiscal responsibility as those core values. Also, we are thinking about how these core values translate into the technology, and we are trying to frame all these within something that is in the works that we call digital justice. And digital justice is being a term that we have borrowed from advocates that have years and years of organizing and thinking about what digital justice means in their communities. So we are actually borrowing that and trying to make it also part of our core values. We are also basing all the work that we are doing on our privacy principles. And we have seven privacy principles that we are also trying to translate from being a guidance into something practical, or at least from the policy perspective. This policy, the surveillance technologies, has different goals. We want to create an inventory of what are the technologies that the city could use in a responsible way, defining what is that, how the use of these technologies should be reported, and what is a proper oversight. What are the due processes for procurement and acquisition of these technologies? Do we need a privacy impact assessment, something that we are going to be discussing today? And also how we can define an inclusive and effective governance structure for the use of surveillance technologies. We are actually right now at the end of this roadmap. So we are in the month of May. This is the last step. We are closing up with all these. We already are putting together and summarizing all these different learnings. As I mentioned, we have I'm going to put it in the chat, but we are actually having a quick report back to the public in general, to the community on all these learnings, which is available in that blog post that I just shared in the chat. And then the idea is that we are going to be working through May and June on starting now putting together that policy, and by the end of June having a draft available for everybody to review. That's our goal. So if you have any questions, please share with us. You can share it in the chat also.
I guess I have a quick question, and I guess maybe the answer is a little obvious, but once the policy draft is released for review, is there then a period for community feedback and any kind of revisions on y'all's part?
Yes, thank you for that questions. Absolutely. So we are not just reviewing just to see this is it. No, the idea is to have, so going backwards from the time that we have assigned to present this policy at City Council, which is September 14th. So that's the time that we already have. So we need to submit a final version of the policy about between 2 and 3 weeks before that day, so meaning the end of August. And considering that we are going to be having like different iterations of revisions, so we have between July and August to do all those different revisions and iterations. One thing is that the final revision has to be through like city attorneys and the city auditor's office. And that potentially might take between 2 and 3 weeks. So we basically have the month of July and half of August to do all the revisions.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's very tight if we think about that.
And to add on Hector's point, me and Onisha, we are also reaching out to like community that we are mostly connected with, and we are conducting some workshop where we are discussing all of this policy development process and their implication on them, so that we can reach out to communities who would not be able to participate in this type of policy development. So, like a little bit of more outreach where we can get a diverse voice in this policy development.
Thank you, Surya, for that. And actually, that offer is always open. If your organization, your community wants or needs and is open to have a presentation or learn or is willing to learn more about this, yes, we are definitely open to go to your community and share all this with you. All right, so let's jump into the recap.
Okay, so yeah, thanks Hector. So Hector sent a link in the, yes, hello? Hector, did you have something?
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Hello, hello.
Can others hear me?
Yes, and Hector,
Okay.
we can also hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay. Hector, can you hear us? Oh, it might be an issue. I'll direct message him. Or you can't hear us?
I can.
Okay,
Sorry.
great. Okay, so Hector sent a link in the chat to an update on basically a summary of the engagement and what we've heard from community members as far, both on module 1 and module 2. And I just wanted to share a quick recap of the last module that we wrapped up over the last 2 meetings. And Nina, I see your text or your chat message here. Yes, we'll make sure that we do that and provide a longer time to look at the polling questions. We have a couple of polling questions that will come up in the discussion. So thanks for letting us know that, and we'll make sure that you have ample time to respond to those. If there's any other sort of needs, just let us know and we'll try to accommodate you as best as we can. Thanks. Okay, so in the last module we covered governance and community involvement, and we asked questions about, in terms of governance, about what should governance look like in terms of surveillance technologies, and what authority should it have? How should governance be implemented and structured, and who should be involved in that type of governance? And then we also asked about community involvement. So what community member, who should be involved in future community engagement as this sort of policy development moves forward and also gets implemented? So any community leaders or grassroots organizations that should be involved in governance and oversight. And then how can we incentivize community involvement in the future so that folks can have the capacity and are empowered to be involved and avoid fatigue? So those are the types of questions that we asked. And then if you can go to the next slide. So I just wanted to quickly recap what we heard. So in the first public discussion event, we talked about, hold on, let me pause here for a second. Go ahead, Nina. I see your hand raised.
First of all, for the access question you just asked, it would help if you don't use grayscale on these slides. I'm seeing that these are grayscales. I have visual impairments stemming from glaucoma, and I would need minimum 14 size point font with high contrast, with no grayscale, no fancy styles that are not easily recognizable. And that would really help. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And I apologize that this isn't visually accessible right now. And I think we can try to make some improvements afterwards and send this back out as a follow-up with some better formatting so that you could see it better. But thanks for raising that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, I can enlarge the slides, so that's no problem. But if it's grayscale, it's very hard to see.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks. We'll try to reformat this. Appreciate it. I'm not sure if we can enlarge it right now, unfortunately. So I apologize for that.
I can. I can enlarge the slides. So with my fingers on the screen, so I don't have a problem with that.
Okay.
But the low contrast, because the grayscale doesn't help me. So. Yeah,
I gotcha. Okay. We'll make some improvements for next time for sure. Appreciate it. Okay, so in the governance, when we talked about governance, some kind of key highlights that we heard, and I won't go through all of these. You can see these in more detail in the link that Hector sent out. But I'll just kind of recap some of the big highlights here. So one was that there is a lot of ideas about forming an independent body that really focuses on validating any reports and inventories and reporting of any surveillance technology that's used, allowing realistic and reasonable time for public comment period. So making sure folks have ample time and there's clear deadlines of when the reporting should be released to the public. There's comments about oversight structure should be able to rapidly respond to urgent and new technology. So we all know that technologies are rapidly changing. And so having structures to kind of respond to those as quick as we can and have inventories and reporting on those as quick as possible is something we heard. And then also having strong community representation in any governance structure and having the power to veto the use of any new surveillance technologies. So thinking about those considerations in the policy. And then if you go to the next slide. So after that public discussion event, we had a policy workshop event that wasn't recorded. So this is really diving deep into looking back at what was discussed in the public discussion, and then sort of drilling down to the nuts and bolts of what that policy can look like. So in that workshop event, we heard that technology ages, but principles don't. So creating surveillance principles also within the governance is important. And then having some level of authority that any governance structure should have. So being able to take some action, like an inspector general or some type of auditor is something that we heard. Including an oversight body could include risk assessment specialists, technology specialists, academics that study surveillance technologies, or elected or volunteer community representatives. And then we also heard that oversight bodies should not include representatives from tech companies who might have any financial interest in selling surveillance technologies to the government. So then we also talked about community involvement. If you go to the next slide, Hector. Some of the highlights we heard from the public discussion event on this topic was involving youth to inform and engage governance, and using the opportunity to mentor and help maybe youth learn new skills in civic engagement and policy development. Building community capacity to be more meaningfully involved in policy development. So again, incentivizing and compensating community members and organizations to provide input and feedback. And then having representation of our most vulnerable populations, such as the unhoused community, and in this discussion. And then having some deep relationship building and frequent loopbacks and report backs to communities about what we heard. And then some other things here is just tailoring the messaging, and because this is such a complicated and complex topic, so really making sure that folks have information that's accessible, that's easy to understand, and can also pique interest in being involved. So then finally, in the public workshop event around community involvement, the recommendations that we heard was aligning improvements with expressed needs of underrepresented and marginalized communities, not just individuals who are typically involved in engagement or have the agency and the ability to be involved. Holding listening sessions that are open to the public to hear community concerns, and also engaging people in non-traditional ways. So we heard lots of ideas about engaging folks through art and design, maybe like things like street teams or sort of guerrilla marketing to spark people's interest who might not have any interest in policy or technologies related to this. So those are some ideas that came up. And then also showing communities what actions resulted from the public input. So again, reporting back and really showing how public input was reflected in the decision-making and the policies. So that was something that we heard as well. So that was a lot of information and a quick recap of what we heard. And again, you can go back to that blog and kind of see what other feedback we heard from the first module session, and we'll also provide an update on this third module about technologies procurement and privacy impact assessment. So be on the lookout for that. And so, Nina, did you have a question? I just want to make sure.
I have a comment to add with
ahead.
this topic that we're on right now about community engagement. I'd like to add. Assurance to prevent, insurance for cyber security and data security, as well as access of technology. You mentioned privacy already. I'd like to mention technology access. We know that a lot of people's mobile phones in the moderate income population have been phased out. And so if people have been using their mobile phone to access Zoom meetings, that eliminates their accessibility. and that it needs to be bridged. I applaud right now that you have the meetings in the evenings after work, which makes them more accessible for people working. And I applaud that you are giving monetary incentives make up the time that we participate. So these help.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate that comment. And yeah, we'll be talking more about sort of, and I guess, well, and I'll pause here actually. If there's other, I know there's folks that were involved in those conversations, if there's things that are missing or like any additions that you want to add to especially around community involvement and governance at this time.
Yes. Also, I'd like to add that a lot of people who have more than one family members and more than 5 devices at home, which means that, you know, for if they have only basic internet Wi-Fi connections, then they are not going to get reliable visual access in the video conferencing, which is this platform through Zoom meeting. And that would need to be bridged to for accessibility.
Yeah, so having access to kind of broadband internet and especially with multiple devices being used.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And especially right now, because the federal government is offering help on that, I think, you know, you could definitely, you know, go through that help from the federal government's offered programs to provide that access.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think Smart City, I think they partner, I forget who you partnered with, but they're, I think there was a program to distribute some devices for folks who were having barriers to internet access and technology. So that's something that the city was working on, but yeah, there might be more opportunities in the future to do that.
You're talking about you mentioned Smart City for computers.
Yeah, go ahead, Hector.
Yeah. Hi, Nina. Thank you. Yeah, Smart Cities is our program, Smart City PDX, and we are hosted at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. And that currently, actually, the Office of Community Technology is the one leading with a new program based on the American Rescue Plan funds.
Okay, good.
Yes, and if you are interested, please.
Yes, I am. Could you put their contact information in the chat, please?
We will put it. Yes.
Thank you.
All right. So let's.
Okay. Yeah. So let's. If you have any other questions, feel free to use the chat to add them, and we'll try to respond to them. But I think we're running a couple of minutes behind, so we'd like to get started on this on the topic for today, which is technologies procurement and privacy impact assessments. So in a nutshell, really talking about how the city should decide what technologies and services to purchase or acquire and vendors to contract with. So how should the city decide on those things and what mechanisms can be used to help make those decisions? So we're going to start with a quick kind of just some background and context. So Hector has a presentation prepared to kick us off here.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. Yes, what I'm going to explain here is first, what is the existing procurement process for technology in general in the city, so we can understand what are the limitations and start the discussion later on what are the specific things that we need to look at when we are talking about surveillance technologies. And then I'm going to jump into privacy impact assessments as the tool that I was describing before, just to understand what are the risks and what are the impacts of using technology. So the current City of Portland procurement process is really divided in 3 broad categories. It's goods and services, construction and public improvements, and professional, technical, and expert services. Particularly in technology falls into the goods and services area. And that's actually in city code, and I'm just putting that as a reference. And it's really the Bureau of Technology Services in cooperation with the Procurement Office, which is part of the Bureau of Resources and Finance Services in the city. The ones that are in charge of reviewing, approving, purchasing all technology that includes software, hardware, and on-premise or hosted systems and professional technology consulting services. One of the things about this process is that it's mostly focused on IT within the city. And I'm going to mention some things where everything is described. That means basically the computers that city employees use, all the infrastructure around internet, Wi-Fi, printers, office devices, cell phones owned by the city, those sort of things. And some of the like larger infrastructure things that bureaus use that may fall like into more the larger kind of infrastructure capacity that the city has, including services that police, fire and rescue, emergency management, and other bureaus use in general. And apologies, because obviously I realize now that this graph is not really very accessible. It's but I'm going to try to describe what this workflow diagram is, right? So this is a screen capture really of just the section within the procurement workflow that goes into goods and services. And basically it comes into a decision point that is asking, are you buying technology? Yes or no? The yes branch goes below, the no branch goes straight. And when it's a no, it's not technology, then it's asking, well, it's less than $10,000. If it's less than $10,000, then bureaus can actually purchase those internally without going through any special procurement process. And our bureaus, the ones that are in charge of that purchase. That actually may include sometimes in practice technology, apps, software, like survey tools, things like that. And the bureaus are the ones using it. However, for some of these technology needs, in paper, bureaus need to have an exemption, apply for an exemption process for that. When it's technology, so within the infrastructure of the city, each bureau has a liaison with the Bureau of Technology Services. A liaison is basically a city staff who is in connection with the technology services and helps the procurement and the selection of the technology, the specific technology. So there is a group and that is actually sharing all these different best practices and things like that. Again, most of the purchases of technology are around office needs, IT, and some specifics for bureaus, depending on the activities that the bureaus are having. Now, there are, after that, so they need to go through procurement, and BTS, the Bureau of Technology Services, has a form that needs to be filled up. Once the form is filled up and reviewed by BTS's staff, then it goes into procurement. It's like a check, and procurement is moving forward to purchase the technology or whatever it is. And then it comes within different rules, right? As I mentioned, if the purchase is less than $10,000, so bureaus can actually do that themselves. So they can actually purchase that internally. If it's between $10,000 and $15,000, so there is an intermediate selection, could be an oral or written, with oral and or written quotes. So it's a procurement process that is not too heavy. Let's put it like that. if the purchase goes from $50,000 to $150,000, then it has to be a written quote, and there is a little bit more revision on that. If the procurement is above $150,000, then there is a need for a formal bid or a request for RFP. Is a request for procurement? No, request for purchase. I don't remember the peak what it is.
Request for proposal.
Proposals. Thank you. So many. Yeah. So within what we are doing is really where we can intervene is that form that BTS is, the Bureau of Technology Services has, that this is checking different steps. And then one thing that, before I forget, one thing that is missing in this workflow is the participation of city attorneys. So in procurement, particularly when it involves information and there is a contract there, it has to go through city attorneys, and city attorneys are the ones also reviewing every single purchase, every single procurement process, which is very heavy for them. And it can be actually a lot of work. There has been cases where attorneys suddenly they need to resolve 100 or more different requests for procurement of technology in the span of only 2 weeks or less. So it can be very stressful for them. And that actually translates into a really long backlog of procurement within the city. So that's something that just the normal procurement, and there are, in addition to that, there are other layers around making the procurement process equitable, making sure that the city is investing in not only in big companies, but also is investing in the small businesses, in women and minority-owned businesses, that procurement could be sustainable, for instance. So there are different layers and aspects that are being reviewed there. And now we see also that, well, we are bringing another aspect, and that's where we are going to be negotiating with the Bureau of Technology Services and with the Bureau of Resources and Finance procurement team to see where these rules around specifically surveillance technologies can actually live. So another aspect of this is that the city has an official list of all the technologies that the Bureau of Technology Services supports. And this is called the City Technology Standards. And it's basically a PDF document describing everything, like a single app that the BTS can actually support. If it's Excel, Word, if it's a Dell computer, if it's a cell phone of a specific brand, everything is here. And it's very detailed. Obviously, it's not extensive, like that covers every single technology, and that's where we are actually going to jump in. And with that, this is kind of a general overview of procurement, and I'm going to pause a little bit to see if there is any question or comment.
Oh, you can keep going. There aren't any questions, and we can have some time for Q&A at the end.
Okay.
Too. Yeah.
All right. So then.
Nina has their hand raised.
Oh yeah. Okay, Nina.
Yeah, I have read articles from this BIPOC scientist that was originally working for Google and who developed, who was in the research for these technology what we're talking about, and she was the first one to alert Google about the bias, the algorithm's bias as it applies to BIPOC folks. Therefore, since I wasn't in the earlier meetings, I'd like to know if this issue has been discussed or has anybody raised it. If you have already talked about it, I'd like to, just get an update to it at the end of your presentation after the slides, and just get get to know about that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And actually, that's where privacy impact assessments are important. And I can just review that when I mentioned that specific case. So the researcher that you're talking about is Timnit Gebru. She is actually right now starting her own organization and highlighted all the different
That's
biases.
right.
As an ethicist, she did that. Yeah, she was actually highlighted that within Google, and that's where, you know, organizations sometimes they don't.
Well, they fired her. Yeah, so she left and opened up her own business.
She left, and also the her boss left as well. So the whole ethics team left actually when that happened. Yes. So, well, let me go into the privacy impact assessment, and then after that, let's see if I answer that question for you. So, privacy services is like this group of support tools and obviously services that help to implement what the surveillance technologies purchases and procurement and helps different bureaus to make decisions and is usually intended to support the decision making and create more transparency, document everything that is being done. So these services include privacy impact assessments and privacy and risk assessments, consulting services to agencies, to bureaus, or training for CDS staff and leadership, developing internal processes and procedures around privacy and information protection. Usually, it requires a dedicated team that with expertise and certification for around privacy. In the city of Seattle, for instance, divides that in those services in 3 big bubbles: operations, surveillance, and special projects. Operations is basically privacy impact assessments in general. Surveillance, they is actually linked together to their surveillance ordinance in Seattle. And the special projects go like, you know, there is a special need, something happens, or through COVID, there is a specific needs. So, or specific events, and that goes to special projects. A privacy impact assessment helps agencies, organizations to first identify potential effects that a proposal for technology or information solution, all the impacts may have upon individuals or collectively. It also helps to examine how detrimental effects on privacy might be overcome. So create a mitigation strategy and help, you know, we have identified all this, now what do we do? And then also ensure that new projects comply with existing information protection regulation and laws, and also follow all the agreements, existing agreements, and all the city, in our case, would help to follow the city's privacy and information protection principles. This law portion is actually really important because there is always this balance between transparency, which means all the public records laws and sunshine laws in general and state level, which actually mandate local government to be transparent, you know, to push everything that we collect, versus everything that we collect may have an impact because we are potentially collecting personal information, people's mobility. You say like how people are accessing services at the city. So there is a balance there on between protecting the information but that information needs to be released. So and having realistic expectations of privacy, that's also important. So when not all the cases privacy assessments is recommended, right? In this case, is basically how Seattle is doing it, and we are learning from there. But when is privacy assessment recommended? When a project, technology, or data sharing agreement or other review has been flagged, have like some high privacy risk due to the collection of private or sensitive data. And sensitive data could be health data, mobility data that is very high resolution, biometric information, your social security number, or your credit card or bank account, for instance. It can also, it's recommended when a technology has a high financial impact and includes the collection or transfer, use or transfer of data by city bureaus or third parties working for or on behalf of the city. And when a project includes a type of surveillance technologies, if these surveillance technologies falls into the definition, we need a privacy impact assessment. Privacy impact assessments are also gradual. So I'm going to jump and speed up a little bit, but they are also gradual. So we start with an initial assessment that we sometimes call a threshold assessment. And then we identify, is this project really collecting information, or is just collecting information, but it's not really, it's low risk, for instance. We are okay with that, so it's documented. Or now we have identified this project is high risk, let's do a deeper privacy impact assessment. Or this project is surveillance technologies, so now let's follow a surveillance impact assessment. So it's go through different stages, and it's been built up based on that. So we basically, we started a pilot trying and offering to city bureaus in Portland privacy impact assessments, and this comes at the end with a risk matrix based on the impacts, and we are evaluating 6 different aspects of privacy impact assessment. I hope we can actually discuss those. One is the individual privacy harms. The second is equity and disparate community impacts, political reputation and image, city business quality and infrastructure, legal and regulatory risk, and financial impacts. And then we also weigh those impacts on the likelihood of happening. For instance, if it's almost certain that it's going to happen, it goes to a certain level, or is, it's maybe it's a risk, but the likelihood is not going to happen, so it goes to a different level. And then we weigh, and depending on if it's low, extreme, like very certain or rare, so we create the upper right side, which you probably see it in red or darker color. It's high risk, then medium risk, and lower risk. That's how we are weighting and building this privacy matrix currently with these 6 different aspects. There are different other approaches to measuring or approaching risks and impacts. One of those that we are currently evaluating with this policy is actually questioning, should we use, for instance, a more human rights approach for measuring impacts? Like human rights approach means your right of housing, for instance, or your right of having like a job or proper education, things like that. How that translates into a tool, that's going to be part of the job that we're going to be doing.
Hector,
yes.
Just
Jay.
before you move on, Jay has her hand raised.
Thank you.
I just had a quick question, and we might have actually covered this in previous sessions, but I wasn't sure if as far as the definition of surveillance, does that also include like social monitoring tools, or is it only like visual surveillance? Does it include like auditory surveillance platforms like ShotSpotter? Like what counts as surveillance in this framework?
Thank you for asking that. And, the definition of surveillance is actually part of this policy. We currently have a draft that we are reviewing collectively. And the existing surveillance definition, surveillance technology definition, is focused on equipment. And that includes like different sensing, like auditory, olfactory, vision, but from the equipment perspective. However, the new version is actually trying to expand from that and also include social mobility and more abstract aspects of the human biometrics in general, including mental tracking, yeah, and emotional tracking as well, social. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, and stay tuned, because I think we are going to be sharing that definition very soon.
And outside of the biometrics, like, when I think about social monitoring, I'm thinking specifically of a program that exists right now that I think Vancouver, their schools use, where they basically create like a school to prison pipeline type of thing, where they're tracking students to see like which students are going to be the problem students, and kind of placing them like on watch and surveilling them that way. And so that's not a video, that's not audio, that's literally, AI that's going through like children's social media.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure if there was a definition of surveillance that beyond the actual equipment, beyond the biometrics, but also including social monitoring specifically, and surveillance through social media and internet and that kind of thing.
Yes, you are completely right. I mean, all these advanced and predictive algorithms being used for decision making, they're definitely a derivative, if not direct surveillance technologies, definitely a derivative product from surveillance technologies. Yeah, agree.
You mentioned emotional surveillance, emotional monitoring.
Yes.
That is something that is a very vaguely defined area, because oftentimes physical expressions of emotions it requires subjective interpretation, and there's more than one interpretation, and it depends on how biased or not biased the instrument is, which is created by man-made algorithm. This is where I'm concerned specifically too about the bias, the negative bias against BIPOCs and people in general as well. We all know that there's biodiversity in all people. And so how do you ensure that, the technologies that are selected is not biased against people in these respects, both the social aspect, the social surveillance and the emotional surveillance? These are beyond issues of privacy.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's the task that we are actually have in front of us, how we can actually consider all these different nuances in general. And part of that is potentially recognizing the shortcomings and building a pathway to, expand. But we need to start somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, and also given current criminal justice system, well, I like to just call it the justice system, although it doesn't currently, the status quo reflects justice. There's always a continuing of efforts, depending on how it's applied and various variables, specifically region and area specific. And so, when that comes into play in these gray areas, that I'm afraid that there's not enough assurance so far to ensure that this still biased and very new technology will not be misused to profile people. Given this negative bias against and inaccuracy and unreliability as applied to BIPOCs. I'm talking about profiling to calculate the potentiality of certain people for criminal behaviors and actions for prevention. And I've already read a lot of these articles in the in the criminal justice field, in the journals. And so that whole science is about profiling people and interpreting people's potentiality based on theories. So that's a major concern here.
Thank you. And as a matter of fact, privacy impact assessments, again, one of the goals is try to understand the biases, where biases could originate, what are the sources of information for decision making, if it's some like advanced algorithm like artificial intelligence algorithm is involved in a specific information services. So that's been like flagged in the privacy impact assessment, and then it can trigger different questions like how the algorithm was trained, what is the data source, and then based on those, reviewing those questions, looking into who's providing the service, looking into the vendor. Do they offer like is that a black box, or do they offer a transparency layer or proper documentation, or there is an like audit services around that? Yeah, that's what the privacy impact assessment does.
And besides privacy, I'm talking about also the complexity of the questions, taking into consideration of specific situational context. Because, for example, we know that in George Floyd's case, he wasn't given those considerations, the context considerations. And unfortunately, in terms of application, there's a human cost involved here. And that cannot wait for slow evolution, development of imperfect technology applications.
Yeah, and that reminded me actually, as a matter of fact, everybody has biases, right? But
a lot of times when it comes to, say, law enforcement, we are not at a level playing field in terms of what we have at our disposal to protect ourselves in health and safety.
Yes,
when we're being surveyed, when we're being surveillance.
Yeah, Nina, you make some good points, and I want to make sure we have enough time for discussion. So I think you're making a lot of points that are relevant to some of our discussion topics here. So let's keep moving forward and sort of wrap up this presentation. And then
that's fine. That's fine. Let's talk about this afterwards.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Anyway, so this is the last slide for the presentation, and it just basically showing that the current proposal, this is thinking about a little bit the efficiency, effectiveness, or the assessment, the workflow. This would be ideally automated, and we start with an initial assessment done on the agency requiring the service or the technology, completes the assessment, submits the assessment, and then the privacy team jumps in, starts looking at the different aspects of the assessment. And the privacy team is, so far we have the technical reviewing, the review, equity review, and the legal review. And then once that's complete, meaning that it comes with identification and validation of the risks and impacts, and then a generation of mitigation strategies, and then that report is back to the agency and helps them decide or negotiate contracts or go ahead with the procurement based on that report. Yeah, so we can actually probably have a break.
Yeah, let's go. So I know that was a lot of information, so we'll have some time to, if there's any follow-up questions, but let's take a quick, let's do a 4-minute break and come back at 6:46 here. And then, feel free to or mute yourself and turn off your video if if you have it on, and we'll come back at 6:46. You take a bathroom break, do a water break, get a snack, and then we'll come back here at 6:46.
Thank you.
Take me in your arms. I can fight the feeling. Kiss me down the spine, yeah. Whisper in my ear, clear, clear. Promises get broken, and you rest. Even if we can't be friends. Still be lovers. Promises get broken. Let me take care of you. Time to time, I can.
Okay. If folks can give a quick reaction or turn your video on real quick to let me know that you're there, and then we'll get started here.
All right.
Oh, I see some thumbs up. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to go into some quick discussion here. We're a little bit behind on time, so we'll probably have about maybe 40 minutes to discuss. And so we have some questions prepared and some polling questions as well. As we go through discussion, please raise your virtual hand to speak and we'll queue you up. And then if you can keep your comments to about 2 to 3 minutes, that would be great. And then, of course, use the chat box to share any comments or questions. We also have an anonymous, a Google document for anonymous comments if you don't like, if you would like, prefer not to have your name attached to any feedback. So let me share, I'll share that link on the chat box here. And if you can go to the next slide.
Yeah, I just want to mention that thank you, Chris, for highlighting some of the concerns that people may have around using Google Docs. For now, well, we have prepared this document, but for next session, we are going to look into alternatives to that.
Yeah, thanks, Hector, for that reminder. And then real quick for just some discussion agreements here before we move on. One, please listen to understand and not to respond. So give folks opportunities to speak as well. Please comment on ideas and not individuals. So let's try to avoid blame, speculation, or any inflammatory language. Wait, which means use self-awareness by asking yourself, why am I talking? And remember that everyone has a right to share ideas, but not everyone has the opportunity. If folks can give each other space to do that, that'd be great. And then no one knows everything, but together we know a lot. And also that, believe people's narratives and don't try to convince people out of their lived experiences. So those are some discussion agreements to keep in mind as we go into some comment period here. So let's switch over to, and I'm going to have Ayano share her screen here and with some discussion questions. And we're going to use a Miro board, and we'll be sort of recording everybody's comments and feedback as we discuss, and you'll be able to see us recording those comments as we go. Go ahead. Melina, did you have something? Oh, if you're speaking, we can't hear you. Okay. Well, if there's anything, feel free to use the chat box too if that's not working for you. Okay, so our first question here is around privacy risk assessments, and I also sent a link to the presentation that Hector just went over if you'd like to reference that. But the first question that we had in general about privacy risk assessments was, under what circumstances should the selection and purchase of this technology be approved? So, so we kind of had actually before in the presentation we had a scenario of if let me back up here. So the scenario was if the Parks Bureau wanted to purchase, say for instance, security cameras to install in like a city managed public park, under what circumstances should the selection and purchase of those security cameras be approved? So we wanted to sort of put you in a certain example of when a privacy risk assessment might take place. So any thoughts on that? And I'll add that scenario in the chat here so you can reference it. I see some hands raised. We'll go to Nina and then Isabel. Nina, did you have something to add? Okay, we'll go to Isabel, and then Jay has her hand raised too.
Thank you. And actually, I wanted to kind of respond with a question. Would it be reasonable to ask for the reverse, given that this is about surveillance technologies? Could it be the standard that all surveillance technologies have to have some sort of approval process, and we think about the way, or which circumstances might be in place to kind of supersede that standard, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what I'm hearing is, should all, no matter what technologies are being proposed to be used or procured or purchased, should all technologies, surveillance technologies, go through the same standard of assessment,
Mhm,
essentially.
mhm.
Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
It's hard for me to answer this kind of question without like interrogating the philosophies behind like the different types of answers that you would get, so it's like, people with a more like Portland Police Department and fascist mentality believes that why wouldn't we put cameras there for everyone's safety, but other people might think that, like myself, think that it's fundamental violation of rights for us not be able to like exist in public without being monitored, and so given that there's such a range of like ethical ideas around technology and surveillance in general, like I'm just really having trouble wrapping my mind around like what kind of answer you're even looking for. Yeah, I don't know if it's just me kind of expressing a little bit of frustration at not being able to answer the question.
Yeah, that's a good point. So because I think what you're saying is because there's sort of an ethical, sort of moral assumptions that we need to also think about in answering this question, and it's hard to I think what I hear you saying is how do we weigh those questions, like, and keep those in mind, and also the more technical sort of aspects of like how we make these decisions. Is that sort of what
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
saying?
that's
Yeah.
pretty much what I was saying.
Hector, do you have any thoughts on that, and or ideas or of how other cities might have kind of dealt with those things?
Yeah, well, the very basic for us is actually our values. So we have privacy principles. So we basically compare like the technology and compare that with the principles that we are following, right? And then we start asking about the core values. Is this anti-racist or not? What are the impacts to all these like different people? And we're trying to document that. And then if there is any specific impact on a specific group of people, then that we can identify. And again, so people, the ones doing the assessment, that also have biases and also have some limitations.
Yes.
Yeah, we try our best and then publish that, make it transparent, so others, ideally the public and those impacted, can actually also provide additional feedback. That's the idea.
Yeah, I have my hands raised. May I speak?
Yeah, go ahead, Ina.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned transparency. I also want to add fair and inclusive and accessible representation. Also, when all our Constitution guaranteed Bill of Rights, as well as human rights, are secured and guaranteed, and also when the specific technology is accuracy and bias proofed on specific rubrics of criteria and rubrics, and that it meets all those standards. And also that there are timely opportunities for people that the technology apply to say, to counter, to have a chance to say, no, there's a mistake right here, and I need to tell you where the mistake is and how is the mistake and how is it not applying to me with justice, through this technology here. So there has to be all these considerations. These are the things I can think of so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are great. Thanks, Nina. Oh, I see Jay with her hand up, and then Chris.
Yeah. I just wanted to expound a little bit about, the need to interrogate the different philosophies behind the requests, because, I think we need to be like looking at these things holistically and looking at the reasonings why people might be seeing surveillance as a viable solution, even though like philosophically, I do not believe it is. And I believe that any like surveillance that is done by the state is going to inherently be racist, because we live in an anti-Black racist system, and like the root of policing is in slave catching, and so like therefore all surveillance is going to disproportionately harm Black people. So because of that, understanding that like any technology that we adapt is going to be used in service of this, like how do we investigate what are the alternatives that are outside of the realm of policing? Like, okay, if there's a problem in the park, maybe the answer isn't like surveillance cameras, maybe it's like community monitors or people being fed or people being shown to treatment centers, or like how are we looking at the situation holistically? So the answer, like the question isn't like, okay, under what situation should this be improved? But the answer should be like, why is this even necessary? And they need to show us why it's necessary. And, it may be in a council, a council does these risk assessments but like I think that there needs to be like it feels like the default is to the technology, give the police more toys, give the police more money, give the police more tools to surveil Black and brown people, when the default should be, why is this necessary? Why do you need more when you have more than every other social service in the city?
Yeah, and all systems, all other systems. And also if there have been systemic problems, biases and historic inequities, and if these haven't been changed in the systems, how can you provide any sort of assurance that the application by such systems would necessarily be unbiased? That's a question.
So thanks, Nina and Jay. So what I'm hearing is, even before this question of how we select a surveillance technology or the purchase of it, that we need to understand why it's needed in the first place, right? Do we need it?
Yes.
And is there an alternative? Like, is there something else that can be used that isn't actually surveilling people? And really understanding the need for that type of technology before we ask these questions about.
Right, because we have a very recent example of our Commissioner Joanne Hardesty, who was, accused, inaccurately slandered for a crime she did not commit. And, if such things happen still within the system, why should it be allowed more tools to surveil, to surveillance us? That does not make sense. Answer that question about that first.
Thanks, Nina. And I see Chris has her hand raised. Jay, do you still have something else to add?
No, sorry.
Okay, great. Chris, go ahead.
Yes, I actually, when Jay was first talking, and it kind of summed up like how this is a difficult question to answer, because when I would go into that park and see all the cameras. I mean, they're usually sold as being a thing for safety, but I don't necessarily see that as safety. I see it more as surveillance. And whenever we say something's for safety, then I think we always have to ask whose safety are they ensuring? And then what will those cameras potentially be used for moving forward? How do we keep them to only be used for, whatever kind of safety we defined? So it seems like once you get them all over, put everywhere, then it just seems like an easy slide into surveillance and forgetting about safety. So I think as Jay and Nina mentioned, considering other options instead of just putting cameras everywhere, seeing how else can we solve this problem? I mean, maybe it is humans going in, maybe it is they're just solving the actual needs rather than putting camera band-aids, so to speak, all over the place.
Yeah. I kind of have a follow-up question based on the comments here, actually for Hector, is kind of based on what folks are saying. Do privacy risk assessments sort of help understand some of these ethical questions? Does it get to some of these questions that folks are asking?
Yeah, not all privacy impact assessments. I mean, it's just depending on how we design it, right? We are trying to, because equity and human rights is part of the assessment, at least the pilot that we are trying. But not every privacy assessment, because there are no standards really do that. Some they just focus on the liability to the organization who's providing or using the technology. But we are trying to switch that and also balance that. It's between the organization, in this case, the City of Portland and all the agencies, bureaus, and the community as well. Yeah. And one thing that I would like to mention is that ethics is not necessarily the same as equity. Something can be ethical and can follow these principles of the greater good, and being completely impactful to a minority group that is not getting any of those benefits. But within this, utilitarian approach of ethics, it works,
Yes, and I think it also depends on how the police department who actually uses the surveillance, how does each person, each user of the technology define who are in this community that they're protecting, right? Because if certain people are already profiled as posing danger to the community because of bias, because of profiling, then they're already ruled out in the community that they're being protected from, right? And so then it's very easy for abuse to happen. And we already know that mainland China is one country that has used a lot of surveillance technology. And we already know they are also the country with the very significant human rights violations records, and so why are we modeling after them?
Jay, you have your hand raised? Go ahead.
Yeah. I was thinking about a previous slide that was talking about certifications, right? And, I've looked into a lot of these tech certifications because I'm interested in getting one, or maybe a few. Certified information systems auditors and all the different security systems professional certifications that are out there don't answer any of these questions about ethics, and they don't even address them, and they would never even try to. And so if those are the people that are going to be on the risk assessment, then we might end up perpetuating a lot of the same issues that are the problem in tech right now, that are a reflection of the lack of diversity of thought. So, these kind of problems that we're specifically talking about, these problems of equity and problems of human beings and how technology impacts the socioeconomic realities of humans. These are questions that really like social workers, caseworkers, counselors, like those are the kind of people that are the best capable of being able to truly assess and answer these kind of questions, not somebody that has a certification in some kind of digital protocol. Those are the worst people, to be able to.
They haven't been trained in these things. Yeah, they haven't been trained in these. They're not
question
experts.
I had is like, what kind of certifications are we talking about? Because the kind of certifications for the question, like there is no certifications really right now, it seems, for the kind of questions we're asking,
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thanks for that comment. And Nina, if you could raise your hand if you have something to say. I know we're in a virtual environment, so I just want to make sure that we give people some space to make some comments here. So that's actually, Jay, you make a really good point. That's actually a good segue into our next question, because that's the question that we are asking is who should be conducting these privacy assessments and what triggers it? So let's move on to our next question here. And I saw Chris's hand go up too. I want to make sure folks have a chance to chime in here. So yeah, Jay, you mentioned that social workers, caseworkers, those types of folks are probably most well equipped to answer those or to conduct an assessment like that. Any other thoughts about who would be the most appropriate to do some type of privacy risk assessment? See Nina's hand up, Isabel, and then Chris. Go ahead, Nina. Nina, I think if you're muted if you're speaking.
Let's see. Okay, sorry. I think ideally, if the police officers are trained, certified in social work, and the mental health aspects of people's behaviors, the behavior spectrums, the anomalies, and being able to decide, because even with people who are mentally ill, you have people with PTSD who are not necessarily dangerous, and then you have people who have a violent type of who has past records of violence with mental illness. So you have to be able to tell which access the risks and danger before and if you just indiscriminately survey everybody and and applying your very limited spectrum of behavior norms, then there's going to be a lot of people falling off to both ends of the spectrums, and if the police, without having a background in mental health, mental illness, mental health behaviors, they won't be able to distinguish the differences in the behaviors in order to assess danger.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Chris, and then Isabel. Did you want to add something before we go to Chris?
They're not all the way together, so I'll wait.
Okay. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay. I just want to say first, I agree with social work, mental health people, but I think you do also need some technical people who can assess the technology that's being considered, so they can better understand the impacts of what the technology can do.
Mm-hmm. So it's more of a both and thing. Okay. Go ahead, Isabel.
Yeah, and trying to formulate the answer as I say it, so I apologize in advance.
No worries.
Yeah, as I agree with the kind of track that we're on here. I think for me, the most important thing is not necessarily the titles that these people have, though I do agree that it is probably very helpful to have some kind of body that is representative of different aspects, right? So the social aspect, the technical aspect, et cetera. But I guess maybe what I'm wanting to say is making sure that we're keeping some of these values and things at the core, because some of these professions also perpetuate harm because we're all embedded in these systems, and so I think it's more cautioning of relying on certain professions and whatnot, and making sure that we're coming at this from a values place and keeping in mind the difference, like Hector brought up, between that equity piece with disproportional impacts and the things that are called the things that are ethical, and what Jay brought up earlier about the different philosophies that might be in tension, even with these different people that are could be making up this body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. So what I'm hearing is, regardless of who is represented and conducting a privacy risk assessment, that we always need to go back to the values and principles that address equity and ethical issues and all the things that we were talking about here. Am I capturing what you're saying, Isabel?
More or less.
Okay. I see Chris's hand up and then Jay's hand up.
I'm sorry, I just forgot to put my hand down.
Oh, that's okay. Thanks. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, definitely +1 to everything that's been said so far. Yeah, especially, I mean, even though I was the one that mentioned social workers, caseworkers, I also fully understand that they can also be police in their own way. And so we don't want to just necessarily substitute one for the other. In terms of like the question of like what triggers and who conducts, what triggers the privacy assessment specifically, I want to go back to this idea that like that should be the default. Like the question should be like, why is this necessary? With the assumption that it's not necessary unless they can really, really prove that there's not a social means to fix this. Because all of these, I mean, I'm making an assumption here, but I'm assuming that all of these requests are in reference to a social issue, right? So they don't want to put up cameras just because. They want to put up cameras because the muggings have increased, or they find needles in the mornings, or whatever. Like they want to put the technology for social reasons. So there should be an interrogation into the social costs and benefits of each technology that is acquired, and if that's, and I mean like each camera, like everything. I think that should be the default. Because I think that, again, at the end of the day, it's kind of an issue of values and philosophy around wanting to see a world where people aren't, punished for like the, social, for having a lack of social determinants of health, and that's what we see right now, is that the less, social determinants of health people have, the more that they're policed and the more these technologies are used on them. And so if we already know that, and if we already know that, like, as anti-racists and people doing equity, we know that racism is the default, bias is the default. So the interrogation should also be the default, because you can't say that something is anti-racist and not also understand that every aspect of, the system that we're in has racism entrenched in it, which is why the default should be to question, how, like, in what way is this racist? And, what way can we do it that's not as racist? You know, I don't know if that makes sense. Kind of rambling. Still
No,
forming
yeah.
thoughts as well.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that. Any other, well, yeah, any kind of other thoughts to add to that? That this question around, or this comment around that the default should always question the necessity of new surveillance tech. Any other thoughts on that? And then I want to move.
I have my hand raised. Can I speak?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I missed that.
Okay. Yeah, because right now, based on the statistics we have, that drug addiction is a major problem that is connected to crimes. And so that why aren't we looking into that first? And how does the surveillance technology help us with that? I'm not drawing a link there so much. It seems that a lot of the issues with drug addiction is necessity to have better access to live-in rehabilitation treatment, drug rehab treatments. And right now, I just look at that statistic, there is less than 1% of the funding from Prop 110 out of the $280 million that goes into getting the people who are drug addicted to connecting them to the live-in drug rehabilitation services. Okay, and so that's the statistics right now.
Okay.
So why that seems to be the root of lots of the crimes, because the people who are addicted need to supply their habit, and they're so affected they can't work to get the money, and a lot of them already not allowed to live at home because they are a danger to their other siblings for drug use and drug sale. And they're living on the streets. And so I'm not saying all the homeless people are that way, but I'm saying the ones who are addicted, who are using and also selling the drugs, and are stealing to supply their habits, committing crimes to supply their habits. Why isn't that addressed? And how is surveilling everybody else help that? I don't see the connection there.
Okay. Isabel, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, and I guess maybe the first thing is maybe a bit of a clarifying question, because I'm trying to picture that flow chart that Hector went over earlier in the presentation, because it sounded like there was both the privacy risk assessment piece, and then there was also, and I think it was in the case for things that were really expensive that would involve some kind of a proposal. So I think maybe I'm having a little trouble, like, would it be the case that we would be having bureaus present a proposal along, right? So, and taking us back to previous modules that we've done, I think we established that one thing we'd like to see is an inventory of existing things and what they're being used for, what the potential harms are. So my thinking is, when you're trying to procure something new, you kind of go along the same process. So are we asking for a proposal that addresses some of these things, like, what's the need that's trying to be met and how can you do it differently? And is that different from what the privacy risk assessment is supposed to be? Or can we reimagine it to be both things? Because it sounds like the privacy risk assessment is something that is open to experimentation and maybe some kind of flexibility. I'm not sure.
Yeah, Hector, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, let me see if I understood properly the comment and question. In terms of, okay, in terms of the the need, like centering the technology justification on the need, that's sometimes disconnected basically from what the community needs to what the Bureau as an enterprise needs. For instance, I can share a case where like Pivot has been looking into automating parking enforcement, right? So they have been looking into automatic license plate readers mounted on a vehicle going around the city, so checking all these different parking spots and vehicles there, and there is somebody who's been parked more than the time that they should be, so there is the ticket, right? And that approach would save the city staff time. You know, there is some benefits there, and the need is actually centered at the agency's need, right? However, one of the impacts of that is that you may have cases where people, one, either they don't understand the rules of the parking, or they are actually, they need to, for any reason, they just leave the parking and they are accumulating all these different parking tickets that go over and over and over. And it actually just happens that most of the people are actually people of color, for instance, and women, perhaps, and working people that they just rushing and they're trying to figure things out, and they are not thinking about where to park and where the car is being parked or whatever reason, right? So they have all these different consequences, and then it's just thinking about there are all these different needs, you know, that we also would need to take into account that they are not, and the result is that the agency has all these different blind spots, and we are trying to compensate those blind spots with a process that actually shows and highlights all these different impacts. Now that process is not completely defined, and we see it as something that is going to be evolving, you know, and however, it needs to be open and transparent to everybody. So it's also not a black box, and that's what we are discussing here. I hope that explains it.
Sorry. Yeah, trying to find my mute button. Isabel, does that sort of address the question and comment you were talking about?
I think so. I think maybe I was a little worried that all of these comments, while they are good, like if we were talking maybe about two separate things. But no, thank you for those comments.
So we have, so we're about 5 minutes before 7:30 here. So, and there are, oh, Nina, I see your hand. Let's do Nina, and then we'll wrap up here. And there's a couple of other questions that we wanted to ask that were a little bit in the weeds about privacy risk assessment. So we might just follow up. We might move that to the next meeting at the policy workshop 2 weeks from now. So, okay, so Nina, go ahead.
Okay, could you please tell me the specific goals and priorities and objectives the city has of for community safety using surveillance technology? Could you please first tell us that?
Yeah, well, you know, that's a really complex question because the city is such a big thing, and that's actually something that we have to navigate. And when I say we, I'm talking specifically about this group that is working on this policy. That includes the Smart City PDX team, the Office of Equity and Human Rights, and the people that we introduced at the beginning, right? So it's relatively a small team. And the sense around like understanding what public safety is, the answer is going to be different if you ask that question to different groups. And as a matter of fact, there are different ongoing projects right now in the city about public safety. You can approach to the Office of Community and Civic Life, and they have a project ongoing. You can approach the mayor's office, and they have a couple of projects ongoing. You can approach police, and obviously they have their approach. You can approach PBOT, the Bureau of Transportation, and they also have another approach to public safety, or parks. So that has been one of the biggest challenges. Focusing now on surveillance technologies, our main intention is really to create transparency for this policy. It's just really to create the transparency that we need and a governance structure that is community-based somehow, that helps to start building towards these larger in like capacity and building a larger connection with the different realities that the community has, you know. And yeah, so we are also trying to scope this policy in a way that it's just working on the initial steps of an even longer journey that we are having. And I know, apologies, because this is not it's not really answering your question, but that's where we are.
Yeah, I appreciate, you giving as much information up to date as possible of the current process, because, it seems that we're bringing out the huge guns before even defining what exactly we're using the big guns for. And that does not make sense to me. And so, until we know there's been a consensus about community safety. I mean, even in terms right now, there's a difference between public safety and community safety. Okay, and so these are the realities we're facing. And so I feel that we really, how exactly was the decisions reached to use surveillance technology? That's my next question. I don't understand that.
Right. So that's the question that we're trying to get feedback on. Is right now the city is building and trying to develop these policies around what the governance structure should be like. How should the community be involved in these in the decision-making process around surveillance technology? So this is all this kind of process right now is to get feedback on that, and then based on this feedback, the city will take that into specific policies and ordinances that could potentially be adopted by city council. So you're asking the right questions, Nina. And yeah, we'll continue discussing those.
I appreciate your transparency, and appreciate this space for us to talk about these things, because they are just very muddy right now. There's no clarity, and we're in, different process intersecting each other right now. And it seems that we really need to have a more clarity and consensus on exactly what goals and priorities we're trying to achieve for community safety, defined by consensus. Then we can say, well, then what are the different options to meet those priorities and goals and objectives? Then we can consider, is surveillance technology one of them that's going to help us? And then next question is it the most feasible, effective, and best solution? A long-term sustainable solution, not one that's going to bring additional problems either. Okay, and so yeah, and I feel that unless we have these preliminary questions answered, as I understand that, a lot of things is time pressed, and we need to, have them simultaneously going at the same time, because it's a long evolving process. But then some things do need to be sequenced in terms of problem solving. And so that's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, thanks, Nina. So Jay has her hand up. We'll go to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're out of time, but I was curious about the difference between the initial impact assessment and the privacy impact assessment. Yeah, like is the initial focused on like the social, or like what's the initial impact assessment focus?
No. As described in that diagram that you are seeing on the screen is basically currently it's just based on what type of personal identifiable information is being collected. If it's only, for instance, basic information that the city needs for a specific service, like just name, email, for instance, so it would go to immediately lower risk, or if it's identified as, okay, now with this process or this technology, we're actually collecting sensitive information, but it's not surveillance technologies, then it goes to this other assessment, or if it's identified as a surveillance technology, then it has to go through the whole thing.
So
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so the initial impact assessment is really just assessing the initial risk that might be involved and the severity of that, and then if it's high risk, then it goes into a privacy impact assessment. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so we are past time. Thank you all for your comments and participation today. Also, late into the evening here. We have our next policy workshop on, let me see the date here. There it goes. It's on May 25th. So this will be our final meeting, an event for surveillance technologies policy development. So if you're able to make it, please join us. Save that on your calendar. Same time, May 25th at 5:30. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Yeah, good night. There's going to be really good more conversations and a lot of things that we missed today.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you. All right, good night. Good night. And I'm going to end.